Hey everybody, it's right at 2 o'clock. I say we give it one more minute just for some stragglers to run in here and we will just get rocking and rolling through this. All right, well, it's 2:01, so I say we get going here. I appreciate you guys being here with us today. I have Justin Fisher, our CEO and co-founder of RiskScout, on the phone with me. He is going to be helping along with this webinar, directing some stuff. So if you hear a man's voice pop in here and from time to time, no worries, we're all good. So I, again, appreciate you guys being here today for this EDD discussion, enhanced due diligence for cannabis customers. It's a super important subject, and there couldn't be a better day to talk about it than 420. So here we go. Just to introduce myself, my name is Kristen Parker. I'm the Director of Compliance at RiskScout. I have been in banking my entire career, but pretty much the last decade or so in compliance. So I definitely have cheeks in the seats experience banking higher risk customers from a BSA officer perspective. So I definitely know that burden that comes along with taking on, quote, riskier or perceived higher risk industries within your bank. I actually built one of the oldest hemp programs in the US alongside the Federal Reserve Bank right after the 2018 Farm Bill passed. So I also came from an institution that banked MSBs and ATMs and cryptocurrency to an extent. And so I get it, guys, and I'm really excited to be here with you to kind of go through what the best practices that I put into play at my own institution I was at, and then what we have been able to instill with other institutions using our platform to kind of help everybody understand how to accomplish banking this sector of higher risk banking successfully, but whilst sleeping better at night, I might say. So I really want to start off this webinar with a poll this time. I really want to get a pulse on who is here and if you guys are banking this space or not, if you're considering banking this space or not. So Justin's going to bring up our first poll here, and I'll give you guys about a minute to finish it. But while we're waiting on this poll results, I kind of want to just take you into our next slide here. I want you to, well, I bet you can only see the poll right now, so let's just
yeah, I might have to get it almost there.
Okay.
Get about 2 more seconds here. Okay, I'll close the poll.
All right. So it looks like we got a pretty good mix here of people.
Hey, Christian, we don't see your slides anymore. We see your Slack, just FYI.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, let's get back in here and.
Yeah, and while Christian's launching that, I'll just say 36% was the highest percentage just here for bragging rights. So nobody banking yet. 29% not yet, but interested in launching a program. 7% all cannabis, 29% hemp or CBD, and 0 for just pure THC.
Perfect. All right, guys. Good to know. So whilst we go through this presentation here, and if you're new here to our webinar series, I really encourage you to go back and watch some of the older webinars that we've had this year, kind of some of them dive into building a cannabis program from scratch. Some of them really deep dive into the risks associated with cannabis banking in general and each sector of the cannabis cannabis industry, and there's many more where that comes from. But I want you to, when we go through this, to really understand that all of this EDD, it applies to hemp, THC, cannabis, and CBD. So regardless of the industry sector, in-depth due diligence is really an expectation by regulators. You will see maybe a little bit of difference between due diligence efforts when it comes to each breaking down the sector. So meaning like a grower due diligence may look slightly different than a retailer due diligence, but we'll go into that a little bit further down. But regardless, it is really an expectation of really what the regulators are looking for. So why are we here today, and why are we having to talk about this to start with? Well, we really have it all written out from us from FinCEN. Our 2 directives from FinCEN regarding hemp and THC cannabis banking tell us this process is really not a nice to have anymore, but a must have. And really, you know, our cannabis side of the guidance came out earlier, obviously, than the hemp side did, but they both really closely align themselves regarding licensing reviews, understanding anticipated activity, you know, all that kind of stuff. They do not, however, spell out how to achieve these EDD requirements, and nor do they say that you really have to police everything that's going on out there. We'll dive into that concept a little bit further down in here. But regardless, let's think about this as we're going through this as, you know, directives really from FinCEN about making sure that we are covering the risks that our institution has chosen to take on, because really that's what the regulators, especially with the rewrite of the FFIEC manual guidance towards examiners, is that, you know, they're not in here to tell us necessarily what we can and cannot do per se, but rather that whatever risks we've taken on as an institution, that we have covered and are trying to do our best to prevent the bad actors from entering and utilizing our system. So let's start with onboarding due diligence. That's the obvious first choice of starting here. I don't know if you guys heard or not, but a cannabis enforcement action, cannabis banking enforcement action was handed down by the regulators probably a couple months ago at this point for a bank that was making THC cannabis, and they were basically slapped on the wrist, or not more than a slap on the wrist, an enforcement action stating that they needed to shore up their program. They got a cease and desist from onboarding any other ones, had to go back and refile SARs that they missed. So when we talk about these best practices, keep in mind that that was the first enforcement action. There's probably many, many more to come for that, you know, from where that comes from, because, you know, one usually triggers more. And so you need to really shore up and ensure that your due diligence effort and your ongoing monitoring, which we'll talk about later, are really in tip-top shape here. One thing to keep in mind is that manual due diligence efforts are very time-consuming and should be part of those considerations that are taken by an institution when they're deciding to launch a certain program like this. You can take that directly from me too. Since I ran a manual program, it's just extremely time consuming. But we'll dive into that in a little bit. So I want you to think about these due diligence best practices as really kind of the ground level, that you should be, you know, launching your program on. These due diligence efforts and best practices have been discussed with regulators and auditors and have been tested through regulatory exams that frankly passed with flying colors. This was built off of when I built our hemp program, one of the very first ones, and then has been tested through THC banking and CBD banking, hemp banking. So these are what the regulators are expecting and really enjoy coming in and seeing an institution doing. I want you to also remember that there's a fine balance on not gathering too much information you're not doing anything with, or not gathering enough information. There's really a striking of the right balance that is key to this successful due diligence practices. So really, let's go into let's start going down these and talk about them individually. Business-specific account applications are super important for any high-risk sector or higher-risk sector. You can't send these guys through a standard application process because it's not going to ask all these nuances that apply to this industry. You're going to want to create specific account applications for, it could even be, just specific to THC cannabis, just specific to hemp and CBD, or it could even go even further into saying, I'm a grower, I'm a processor, and have them fill out those specific applications for those. It's as far as you really want to take it. You're going to want to review business formation documentations to ensure that you're dealing with a legitimate business here, that you understand where they were formed and where they formed under the laws of that state, that they would be recognized as a legal entity. Reviewing licensing documentations and applications for that licensing is really important. You don't have to do both. You can do either or, depending on if they have the actual license available for you to review. Regardless of you just reviewing it, you need to verify that the status of that license is active with appropriate authorities. And that may look different from state to state. Every state is a little bit different on who they require to have license. In North Carolina, if you sell CBD products, process it, you pay $20, you get a license, and then nobody cares what you do after that. If you're selling it retail wise, there's no license for that. If you go to Texas, it looks very different than that. You got to have a retail license. There's certain regulations, so it will vary state to state. But you need to always verify that whatever you're looking at license wise is actually active and legit. Identifying and verifying key parties and beneficial owners is very important for the fact of understanding who is involved with the business. It could be that you don't want certain individuals. Maybe if you are a hemp and CBD bank and you don't want anybody who is associated with marijuana involved in banking at your bank, what if one of those key parties is? It's very important to collect that information so you can scan the parties against risk lists. And that doesn't just include OFAC and PEP lists and all the other 13 different watch lists. It includes marijuana licensing lists. You're going to want to see if you're a THC cannabis bank, you're going to want to make sure that marijuana license is legitimate. Maybe the people that are there, do they have other involvement with other marijuana companies? If you're a hemp and CBD bank and you don't want anything to do with marijuana, but you've got a key individual that holds a stake in a marijuana company, that can be identified through marijuana licensing research. Maybe you ask that customer not to, or that key individual, maybe to sign an affidavit that they won't commingle funds. Maybe you make them resign from that power of position. It really depends on your institution's risk appetite. Regardless, you're going to want to scan the businesses, the business itself, related businesses, key parties, any of those against adverse media. It's very tricky to do adverse media manually because things can get hidden further back into the internet, where we wouldn't see them on the first 3 pages of a Google search. Having proper tools to do adverse media searches is super important, because what you're pulling back in that adverse media could tell you really if you want to bank this person or not. I'll give you a great example. We had an institution that we were helping with their verification of their KYB information, pulled adverse media on some key parties, only to find out that Some of the key parties had recently been arrested and fined for selling products that were claiming to cure COVID and prevent and cure COVID, and then also some other really dirty stuff. So it wasn't necessarily that, you know, that customer was doing it right that instant when they were considering banking them. It's the fact that it could have been a reputational risk for the bank, and it also red flagged that this individual is willing to do risky things that are outside of current rules and regulations. So maybe that's not somebody you want to bank. So that's where really important thorough adverse media searches come into play. You're going to want to also obtain an understanding around the purpose of the account and expected activity. I will say that when you're collecting this information to start with, that a lot of these guys believe that they're going to make tons and tons of money. And so whatever you're collecting at account opening as their anticipated activity may not actually be what's going to occur in your account. Not only because, you know, it's not, they maybe aren't achieving what they thought they would, but these businesses are usually startups. They're usually nimble. They change per whatever trend in market is. Maybe they realize that they can do their own processing and their own retailing became a vertical, so that maybe, you know, it's just dynamic is the right word to use for these businesses. So don't be too alarmed if the purpose of the account and the expected activity morphs so over time. Well, we'll talk later in here how it's important to check in with your client on getting updated information so that you know how to really test what's going on in the account against what's really normal for this business. You're also going to want to review website marketing materials. This is a very important key to ensuring that your business is trying to do the right thing. If it is an e-commerce store, you're going to want to get on there and review to see if they have FDA warnings on there, age verification, claims of efficacy. You don't want them on there telling people that this can cure their cancer or their COVID. COAs are important to have on a website so that consumers know what they're taking. Now, do a lot of consumers know what they're looking at? No, I would venture to say that probably some bankers don't know what they're looking at on that either. But it's important to really evaluate your customer that way. It doesn't need to just stop you from banking that customer at all. Maybe not necessarily, because it's not your job, again, to police these guys. But if you're per se lending to these businesses and you're counting on, you know, their revenue from their sales on their website, and then the FDA comes in here and says they're going to shut you down because you're violating all of these rules and you around claims of efficacy and all this stuff, that can be detrimental to your institution's program. So you're going to want to review that. And if you find any red flags, have that conversation with the applicant to kind of educate them and see if they even knew they were allowed to do that, not allowed to do it. Will they change it? So on and so forth. You're also going to want to conduct an on-site inspection of a business. I don't know an institution that has not been required to do this. It's really a best practice to make sure that the business is actually there, number one, and number two, that they are doing what they say they are doing, and you know, number three, that everything is you know, hunky-dory, and for lack of a better terms, within the business. So on a site visit, I always encourage, and you guys, if you've been here before, have heard me say it, a drive-by of the business, a kind of unannounced visit where maybe you don't identify yourself. You go in, you kind of check it out, buy something if you need to, because when you tell the customer that you're coming, they're going to clean everything up and they're going to make sure everything looks good for their banker. But what happens when you walk out that door and they pop up that sign that says this now cures COVID, you know, that can be a risk. Or maybe have a prohibited product on their shelf, maybe something, you know, if it's above the THC level, you know, vapes in states that don't allow vaping, all that kind of stuff. So really, a site inspection is something that, if you're considering this program, that's something that you're going to have to do, you know, on at least at onboarding. Some institutions do it at onboarding and then here on after on a periodic basis. So to continue on the onboarding due diligence, you're really going to want to analyze material attributes of the business as well. So if this business is an existing business, there really are going to have testing results out there. More than likely, 99% of the time they do. You're going to, if you're hemp and CBD banking, you're going to want to review those testing results to see what it's like. Some THC cannabis banks do look for some other things in there. It's up to your institution's risk appetite in that manner. You're going to also want to request copies of any licensing reports, reports to authorities, including material changes, harvest reports, disposal reports. Again, going back to hemp CBD banking, if that THC testing results from the state come in as hot, above the 0.3 level, and they've gone through their multiple testing cycles and it's still testing hot, they have to dispose of that, and you're going to want to have proof that that actually happened. So you're going to want to see that report. Analyzing the legality of the business is important, making sure they're registered with the state that they're operating in, making sure that all the licensing that they need to operate in the states outside of the state that they are in is on the up and up. And you're going to want to review information on significant vendors vital to the business operation. It varies on how in depth you need to go on that part, but let's just say that you're lending to one of these businesses and they're dependent on one of their vendors. You're going to want to make sure that vendor is very reliable in this source. Again, you don't want to collect information from a prospect that you're not going to review. That's super critical. Too much information that you have on your hands that you won't review is going to bite you at the end of the day. It really will, guys. So what does it take for a typical manual onboarding due diligence time frame? This is not a time frame that was just pulled out of a hat somewhere. I ran my own hemp CBD banking program for myself right after the Farm Bill passed, and I did everything manually because I didn't have the right tools in my pocket. Take it from me, big lesson learned. These numbers on the screen are not estimated. If you're doing everything regulators are expecting you to do and doing it right, this is the actual time frame it would take me to review a single business. You think about, having to go, and even when I was doing all of this, was it to the level I should have? Maybe not, because if I don't have the proper adverse media tools or these other tools in my pocket, maybe I'm not getting a thorough enough look at my business anyway. I would do my darndest, but doesn't mean that I was getting everything accurate. Now, multiply that by 10 or 100 or whatever your program limit is. It takes typically about 30 plus hours for a compliance body to complete the due diligence review manually. It is very, very, very time consuming. So what can you do to, kind of, lessen your burden there? Typical onboarding due diligence timeframes with proper technology usually is around less than 3 days. The time is significantly cut down when equipped with proper tools that streamline the due diligence efforts for compliance personnel. So it's not a totally hands-off approach, but strikes the right balance between, automation and, BSA officer eyeballs on it. It is important to have tools in your pocket like this because there is literally not a BSA officer that exists out there that is not overwhelmed. And so by automating this process, it allows the program to grow while not overwhelming a BSA department. And having these technologies allows you to, filter out for people that would fit in your risk appetite, allows the customer to virtually fill out applications, automates the due diligence efforts, and then streamlines any type of communication that you need to have with that customer to kind of fill in the gaps of information that you're looking for. It is really important to strike the balance with technology like this, because BSA officers are typically scared to allow automation. Is scary sometimes, because at the end of the day, BSA officers are personally held liable for failures in automation. So really is striking that balance between automation and allowing the due diligence to be automated. You know, go back and review what the application said, revalidate everything on there to look for red flags and whatnot. But at the end of the day, the BSA officer has the tools they need right there in front of them with a report to say what they need to look at. They're not just letting the decisioning come through the automation piece. The decisioning still lies with the BSA officer or whoever the financial institution has decided is the final decision maker. That makes me feel better. It streamlines the process, but I still get to put my eyes on it. I still get to feel better. So let's move on to ongoing monitoring and due diligence efforts. You know, really the heavy lifting starts after the customer is onboarded. The onboarding due diligence is time consuming. There's a lot of effort that gets put there, but really after the customer is onboarded, is really when the heavy lifting starts, when it talks to continuous monitoring, when it talks to continuing periodic reviews, collecting information from your customer. When we go through this, I want you to remember that it may look a little different for each industry sector, but essentially the concepts remain the same. Ongoing monitoring best practices, a lot of them mimic what was completed at onboarding. It's really important to ensure that your KYB processes occur throughout the life of the relationship and not just at onboarding. And again, it can be super time consuming if it's done manually. So let's go through each of these and kind of talk a little bit in depth about the importance of each of them. Obtaining and reviewing subsequent license applications is super important. Again, you're going to have these businesses that are nimble. You're going to have them changing. Maybe they're expanding and whatnot. You're going to want to ask them for any updated information and then review those licensing applications. For existing and new licenses, you're going to want to monitor the license statuses. I'll give you a good example of how there can be a failure in this system of monitoring or just relying solely on the expiration date of a license. In North Carolina, a hemp license is issued for 3 years, but the business owner only has to pay the hemp license fee 1 year at a time. So while I've maintained retained a copy of the 3-year license, my business has failed to pay year 2 fees, so now their license is no longer good, but I'm assuming that the license is perfectly fine because I am relying on that expiration date. That can be a slippery slope and get you into trouble. You're going to want to also maintain an up-to-date understanding on the material attributes of the business, you know, looking at those COAs, you know, analyzing the legality of the business, make sure they're still registered. You're going to want to request and review information on the vendors and see if those have changed. All of that stuff wrapped up into really key parts of continuing to monitor for structural changes of the business. You're going to want to include it in that, monitor the business, key parties, related businesses, and beneficial owners against adverse media. People, you know, things come out in media at different times. Things get dug up on people all the time. It's important to continuously monitor these guys against adverse media so that you are staying abreast of what may be potentially a reputational risk for your institution. Periodic on-site inspections, documenting those is super important. A lot of institutions go see every business in their portfolio or their cannabis portfolio at least annually here on for the life of the business. Some of them only go and see plant touching businesses annually after. It really is dependent on what your institution's risk appetite is and what your regulator is wanting you to do in that space. A side note here, if you have a program that's in place right now and you haven't been doing periodic on-site inspections and it's written in your policies and procedures that you do, but you haven't done them because of COVID, I want you to go back and make sure that you have it documented why you haven't been doing these periodic on-site inspections. You need to have it documented. You need to make sure that the board has seen it, because your regulator will ask for that. We're seeing that a lot at other institutions. Again, you're going to want to continue to monitor website and or marketing materials. It's really important, like we said, day to day, what's on a website can change and what people are claiming on a website can change. So you're going to want to keep abreast of that. And you're going to want to, whenever there is some material change to the business or a material event occurred, you're going to want to reassess the risk profile of the customer. So let's talk about the transaction monitoring that you do as well. So while, the first slide that we just looked at for ongoing touched on all of the aspects of the business, but what's really happening with that business transaction wise? There are some companies out there that will make you feel like you need to police this industry like your law enforcement. That is not the expectation that the regulators have. They will tell you that. Ask them and they will tell you that. These best practices for transaction monitoring are based on the actual guidance out there from FinCEN, from regulators, and there's no fear mongering in these. These are really what our institutions are doing and that have been signed off on by regulators. So you're going to want to review the FinCEN red flags for cannabis banking. If you haven't already done that, please do. It's got some great information in there. You may want to just refresh yourself on it from time to time. There's not been any updates to it in a long time. If there is, I'll tell you. I keep abreast of stuff like that. But just keep yourself informed on what you should be looking for. You also need to file SARs and CTRs as appropriate or required by FinCEN. Reoccurring SAR filings are inevitable for THC cannabis banking. They're a requirement per FinCEN directive. You have your, couple different SARs based on if the customer is doing something suspicious or if they're not. CTRs are equally as important. I want you guys to remember that CTRs are your responsibility for filing regardless if that customer is using an armored car service or not. If the customer is using an armored car service, regardless of what that armored car service or the customer is telling you, you are required to fill out the CTR for them. I know it firsthand. I came from an institution that failed to tell me that there was a customer they set up with armored car service, and I ended up having to backfile 250 CTRs because of it. That is not a fun conversation to be having with your management, your regulators, and it sure as hell is not any fun to backfile that many CTRs. It's a nightmare. So if you keep that in mind, write it down, big bold letters. You're responsible for that. Don't be me in that situation. If you have the ability to create peer groups to compare customer activity for anomalies for specific industry sectors, that's a good practice. It's not the end all be all for monitoring. Again, these businesses are nimble. They may change. Not every grower looks the same. Not every processor looks the same, but it is a good way to kind of understand if something's sticking out like a sore thumb, so that an alert is generated for you guys to look at that way. You're going to also want to compare current account activity to anticipated activity discovered at onboarding to look for anomalies. So again, don't be alarmed if the customer says one thing at onboarding and it doesn't match what is going on in the account. It's not necessarily an alarm to just throw the customer out by any means, but it is a good time for you to go back and follow up with that customer for an update on their business. That's where you periodically asking for customers to refresh anticipated activity and report on any business updates is super important, so that you're always trying to gain a better understanding of that business. And anytime that something does stick out like a sore thumb, something isn't lining up with anticipated activity, you should be requesting supporting documentation and an explanation from your customer for activity outside of their anticipated transactions. So if that customer comes and says, well, no, that $100,000 wire to China was to buy equipment, thank you for telling me that, Mr. Customer. So now can you prove it? And I want, an invoice and a picture of the equipment. Anything to help justify better that actually did take place and that actually occurred. They may be lying to you, they may be taking pictures of someone else's equipment, but that's the gamble we're taking here. More than likely, the customer is probably telling you the truth in that activity. Again, manual reviews, just as onboarding, is just super slow. There's a lot of pain points in there. Yeah, I sincerely loved banking cannabis at my last institution. There's joy in helping misunderstood businesses be able to bank and give them a chance to thrive and grow. But what I did not like, and I almost somewhat hated, was all the manual monitoring that happened after they were onboarded. Reviews took sometimes, a week or more, because I'm waiting on that customer to give me updated information on their business. I'm communicating with them through email, trying to follow up with them. And all of this going on, I still got to document everything I'm doing for audit trail purposes. So I'm putting them in my shared drive or cold storage. I'm having to do this, that, and the other. And it makes audit prep a nightmare that way. So how do you really fix that? How do you fix all of these problems? You can do it by streamlining your onboarding and ongoing due diligence efforts with automation. And that's really what we do at RiskScout. I'm not here to, sell you stuff. I'm telling you there is a solution for this. We've got it, and it will make your life way easier. We're going to fix your manual burdens and help you sleep better at night with this type of automation. And again, I know that us BSA folks get kind of like cringy when we talk about some automation, but really, again, striking the right balance is key here. We can really help you complete your onboarding of customers, the due diligence effort of that part within 48 hours. And we're going to automate your communications, your check-ins with your customers, and your reviews in the system, and everything's going to be tracked for audit trail purposes. The onboarding, the way it's streamlined is through pre-qualification. Really, that process looks like setting up filters to help you, get out some leads that you wouldn't even be interested in, so that when you're looking at these customers, you're looking at people that might actually fit your risk appetite. The application is really centralized for the customer. It's a great experience for the customer. They're able to do everything from their phone, their tablet, their computer. It's like a virtual branch experience. And they're going to be filling out an application that's customized to whatever your financial institution's risk appetite is, and really ensure that the documents you are collecting from these customers are collected securely and virus scanned. You don't want to be that person who gives your whole institution a virus. And then the app review is really so streamlined in this manner. It's centralized again and secure. And then we're able to automate your validation of that KYB information. It's kind of a KYB plus validation. We're going to look at everything that we can on there for you to tell you, yes, this matches what everything they are saying is true to the best of our knowledge, or no, go look at this. This is a red flag. And those results return in less than 48 hours, typically around 24 hours. And then all of this allows you to directly communicate with business. Again, so if you're there needing to fill any type of gaps that are questions you have on the application, you can directly communicate to the customer through our application, and then the customer can respond through there. It makes things very, very quick and very secure. And the ongoing due diligence, which is my super favorite part about this whole thing, is going to allow you to finally toss those spreadsheets, and calendar ticklers, because we're going to make your life so much better with ongoing due diligence that is automated and periodic reviews that are automated. Again, everything is tracked digitally for audit trail purposes, so you don't have to have that nightmare of audit and exam prep where you're going to all these different places to get the data that you need to make your auditor feel comfortable or your regulator feel comfortable that you are doing the right thing. And then automated customizable check-ins with customers. These are super successful and super helpful for completing your periodic reviews. Check-ins can be designed to collect any type of information you want with the customer. A good example would be a grower's check-in. They look different than a retailer's check-in. Checking in with the grower in the spring to see what their plans are for their crop, and in the fall to get their testing results. All of that allows for you to set up these automations so that about 6 to 8 weeks you're collecting the most up-to-date information. 6 to 8 weeks before your review is due, you're collecting the most up-to-date information from your customers so that when you go to do your customizable periodic review, it is aligned that you have the most up-to-date information from your customer. You do your transaction review, document some other stuff, and you're done within a matter of a couple hours instead of a couple of weeks. The other beauty of it too is there's automated ticklers and reminders for expiring licenses and periodic reviews. So you're never going to have to keep living spreadsheet hell again, basically. Everything can be tracked through here, scheduled through here, and when things are due or out to your customer, it will automate that out. When it's time for you to do the periodic review, you're going to be automatically reminded. It's just a beautiful little process of meshing all of the things that we do manually now for our ongoing due diligence into one system that just makes your life so much easier. All right, guys, so with that said, all of that said, I got one more poll I think you guys wouldn't mind doing, just to kind of see going forward what other webinars you might want to see us do. In the meanwhile, if you have any other questions, concerns, shoot us here. You can always contact me at my email or on LinkedIn. I'd love for you to give us a follow on LinkedIn and subscribe to it through our website, RiskScout.com. There's great content that comes through there a lot. And if you have any questions you don't want to ask here, feel free to reach out to me as well. We have a high-risk banking group on LinkedIn that is just a lot of like-minded people like you and I who are just trying to kind of get out here and solve. They're all vetted people, all in banking. So there's good war stories in there. There's good best practices being shared, good articles, some good memes from time to time. We'd love for you to join it so that we can, kind of help and support each other in this land. We love to pick each other's brains a lot. There'll also be a survey that goes out after this webinar to kind of see, again, what other topics you might like. Kind of let us know some feedback on this webinar as well. Justin, you got anybody asking any questions?
Nope, we don't have any questions. We'll just remind you guys, we'll keep it open for another minute or two. If you send a question, I'll just anonymize it, so we don't have to raise your information. But if you do have a question, just fill it out on the webinar controls, and I'll ask Kristen. While we're waiting on that, I'll share the results of the poll. 64% were interested in audit and exam prep for the program, 55% in cryptocurrency, and then it was a tie for the other two, pitching and building cannabis program and economic opportunities, 27% each.
Perfect. All right, guys. Well, again, reach out to me if you have any questions, and I'll be ready and waiting to answer. Anything else? All right, guys. Well, we'll talk later. Thank you for your time today.